For skill 4, we're working on facings. So a facing is something that finishes an opening on a garment. So we're going to take our invisible zipper skill sample, and we're going to pretend that this is like the zipper opening on a skirt. And this top edge is our waist edge. So we're going to add a facing to our skirt waist to help finish it, kind of complete the look of it, make it so it doesn't have a raw edge. So here's what you're going to need. You're going to need your invisible zipper skill sample. You're going to need 2 fabric swatches that are 2x5, 2 interfacing swatches that are 2x5, and your thread snips. I want you to start by taking your fabric swatches and your interfacing swatches. Your interfacing, you'll notice that it has a rough side and a smooth side. The rough side actually has glue dots on it, adhesive dots. And what they do is when you add heat from your iron, the glue dots will melt and kind of adhere to the fabric. And interfacing is used to help stabilize, add a little bit of body to certain areas. And we especially want that around like the opening of a garment, just to hold the shape of it really well. So I want you to take and put the bumpy side of your interfacing on the wrong side of your fabric, okay? So we have the right side and the wrong side, and I want you to put the bumpy side of your interfacing on the bumpy side of your fabric. You're gonna go and just put your iron on top of it, and we're using time and heat. And that's what we're gonna do to help melt the glue so it'll sink into the fabric and adhere, make the interfacing and the fabric become one. So go press that and then meet me back here. All right, your pieces should look like this. You have the right side of your fabric, and then on the wrong side, the interfacing is adhered. If your edges are coming up of your interfacing or it feels like they're not quite one piece, just use more time and more heat and hold your iron there, and they'll eventually, become one. Now that you have your facing pieces done, I want you to go and serge one long edge of each of them. Your facing pieces should be serged along one long edge now. And next we're gonna take them and we're gonna add them on either side of our zipper to kind of help finish this top edge. So I want you to unzip your zipper and roll that zipper out so you can see the whole top edge of this swatch. I want you to take one of your facing pieces and put it right sides together with that. Now make sure your zipper cannot be folded under, it has to be rolled out. Now your swatch, I want you to line it at the top edge here, and these short ends should align as well. We are going to sew a plain seam to attach this to the top of our zipper. We're going to use our standard 5/8 inch seam allowance. We're going to reverse at the beginning, stitch all the way down, and reverse at the end. And again, we're sewing them together at this top edge. As you're sewing, you're going to notice that you have to go over the bump that is the zipper, and that's okay. It should be fine. If you get kind of stuck, you can just nudge it along. That's what you should have when you're finished. That's what it looks like on both sides. Now go and do the same thing with this one. Again, that's what you should have when you're finished. The next step we're gonna do is we're gonna grade our seams. You should remember this from skill 1, where we graded our seams, but grading is, we're talking about these seam allowances here at the top. Eventually what's gonna happen is this facing is going to get folded to the inside of the skirt. And so these seam allowances are kind of gonna be enclosed up in there, and we wanna reduce some of that bulk. So I am going to take the seam allowance that has the interfacing attached to it, and I am going to trim half of the width off. Do that on both sides. this is what you should have now. You should have a rather short and then a longer seam allowance. What you're going to do next is you are going to press your facing up, and you're also going to make sure that your seam allowances are both being pressed upward as well, towards the facing. So like I said, open up your facing and your skirt and then press your seam allowances up towards your facing and meet me back here. Here's what we've got. Nicely pressed open on the front, and then on the back side, all of our seam allowances are being pressed up towards the facing. Both sides. Nicely pressed open, seam allowances pressed up. The next technique we're going to do is called understitching, and this is one of my favorite sewing techniques ever because it makes your stuff just look so clean and polished. So the purpose of understitching is to help keep the facing, this piece, on the inside of the garment so that it doesn't kind of roll out. So we have our facing going this direction and our seam allowances also going this direction. What I want you to do, it's sort of like edge stitching, but you are going to stitch on the facing side of the seam, really close to the seam, but on the facing side. I'm going to show you on my machine, and then I'll show you the finished product so then you can see what it's like. Just like we did on our flat felled seam, how we did some edge stitching that was really close to a folded edge, we're doing that same sort of thing, but we're just doing it really close to this seam. And what you're catching is you're catching your facing and your seam allowances, okay? So you're catching the facing and the seam allowances, and you're stitching on the facing side of the seam, about 1/8 of an inch away. I am going to line up the seam with the inside of this toe on my presser foot. That's how I know my stitch line is going to be really nice and close to that seam line. I definitely want to make sure my facing is going that way and my seam allowances are also going that way. And again, this is just a plain seam. Back stitch at the beginning, stitch all the way down, and back stitch at the end. And as I go, I like to really use my hands to pull these apart. This is what it should look like. Nice and consistent distance from that seam line. It's on the facing side, and I have definitely caught my seam allowances in it so that they're pressed up towards the facing. So go ahead and do that exact same thing on the second side. There we go. We have both sides understitched. The next thing I want you to do is put your zipper foot on your sewing machine. We're almost finished, but we really need to complete this short end of our facing, because you'll see that if you turn this to the inside of the garment, it looks nice, but our zipper is kind of poking out, and this is a raw edge over here. So what I want you to do is take your facing right here. Put your fingernail on your zipper tape right underneath the seam where the facing is sewn on. I want you to fold your facing right sides together with your zipper tape. Okay? Now when you fold it right sides together, you should be able to see both of your stitch lines up here. And what we're going to do is we're going to sew the short end of our facing to our zipper tape right here on the seam allowance. Now I'm going to do the first few stitches just to kind of get myself set up. Now you don't have to be super close to the zipper. You don't want to be over here on the edge either. You just kind of want to be stitching right in the middle of where that zipper tape is. So I just got my first few stitches set in here. My needle is down in my project. I'm going to take and pull the lower end of my facing. I'm just gonna pull it over a little bit. This will help later on when you're pressing it so that the facing won't really get in the way of the zipper. But again, instead of having them perfectly aligned here on this short end, I'm gonna take the bottom of my facing and I'm just gonna kind of pull it over a little bit. You see, so that it juts out a little bit over here. And then I am going to stitch down kind of the middle of the zipper tape until I get to the bottom of the facing, and I'll back stitch. Hopefully you can see that. My stitching is kind of landing in the middle of my zipper tape. And you'll see that my facing just kind of juts out here at the end. All right, let's do that on our other side. Again, right below the seam where the facing is attached, you're gonna put your fingernail and fold your facing right sides together with your zipper tape. You should be able to see both of your stitch lines on the facing side. Get your first few stitches kind of set in there. That's when you can go and take the bottom of your facing and just kind of bump it out a little bit. Okay, we've got both sides stitched on. Next, what I want you to do is try to turn these right sides together, or right sides out. So this is kind of what it should look like on the inside, and that's kind of what it should look like on the outside. It's not quite complete. We need to press, obviously, always press. Now, after I press, if I decide that this corner feels a little bit too bulky up in there, I can push it wrong side out again and kind of trim this corner a little bit, okay? But first I want you to try to turn it right side out and press it and just see. If you decide it is too bulky, you can trim diagonally, right like that. And then you can also kind of grade this seam by trimming the facing. So do you see how now there's like a tiered effect on my seam allowances? It's kind of tiered a little bit. That helps with bulk. Same with trimming this diagonally. Just make sure you don't trim where you stitched it down right here. All right, so go press and see how much nicer and more polished it looks. Another tip I have for you is do not press it, don't push it so far right sides out that your zipper is like bulging out right here, okay? We kind of want to find a nice, easy medium where it's pressed right sides out, but not too much, okay? Once you've pressed it, this is what your finished sample should look like. I really love how mine is in alignment right here along the top edge. I also am looking for beautiful, beautiful understitching. I want to see that you've also graded your seams on the inside to reduce bulk, and that these edges of your facing are nicely finished. So do you see how there's just this little gap right in between my facing sides? That was why I pulled the bottom edge of that facing over. It just kind of keeps those facing pieces curled under a little bit more to allow spacing for my zipper pull to ride up and down. So this is your finished facing skill sample. Make sure you fill out your backing paper and put it in a clear sheet protector, and you are free to hand that in.